I want to be clear that we are hopeful that this will be a short-term measure, and we continue to work with the health and medical community on off-ramps for masking. I also want to remind everyone that we already have some experience with being able to pivot based on the data. As cases dropped to record lows in June and July, we were able to successfully hold summer school in our K-12 schools for all students, vaccinated or not, using a mask optional protocol. I know we all want this to be over, and we are hopeful that this will be the final hurdle of the pandemic. But we also cannot completely rule out the possibility that masks may be required intermittently throughout the year based on the trajectory of the virus and any new emerging variants. In some ways, we're having to learn to live with this virus. Today, if the board votes to declare exigent circumstances and authorizes me to put in place health and safety requirements, the board should expect I will enact a temporary mask wearing protocol for all students in grades K-12 with exemptions for medical or behavioral reasons. The protocol would be in place for about the first month of school until October 1st, after which time we will begin to look for off-ramps on masking in schools, beginning with those students and staff who are vaccinated in schools that have at least an 80% overall vaccination rate. This does not mean that vaccinations will be the sole determinant for unmasking, but if vaccinations were to increase among those eligible, especially now that the FDA has fully approved the Pfizer vaccine, that would be great. Indeed, ultimately, we believe that vaccinations will be the most important factor in bringing this pandemic to an end. We know that a return to this fall to full-time in-person instruction is crucial, and after the challenges of last year, it will be incredibly important for this year to get off on a strong start. We had previously put in place significant steps to support our schools and districts as they open this fall, including working with DPH to host site-based vaccination clinics and strongly encouraging schools to maintain or establish a robust plan for COVID-19 testing in our schools that the state is providing free of charge. Madam Chair and members of the board, I'm now recommending that we take this one additional step. Being mindful that we amended student learning time regs to include a section relating to health and safety standards during either a state of emergency or during other exigent circumstances as determined by the board. I'm asking you to declare such exigent circumstances due to the rise in COVID-19 cases. And with that, Madam Chair, I will turn it over to you for any discussion and a vote.
Thank you, Commissioner. Any discussion amongst the members? Secretary Kaiser.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thanks to the board for coming together today and the commissioner for his leadership in putting forward this proposal. You know, I think today's vote is really about two important things. The first, obviously, is ensuring that we have a smooth opening of school without any confusion or ambiguity about the health protocols that everyone is expected to follow, especially in a time when there is growing concern and uncertainty about the Delta variant. The second and ultimately more important issue is to reinforce the importance of vaccinations and to create incentives for school communities to get all their eligible students and staff vaccinated as soon as possible. As the governor and all the state and national public health officials have said, the only way we're going to get over this, and the only way we're going to be able to put COVID behind us is through vaccinations. And today's vote is another tool to help us get there. Obviously, circumstances may change in the coming weeks, which may allow us to take a different course, as the commissioner said. But for now, the safest and simplest path forward is to mask up in schools as we all work to meet or exceed the 80% vaccination benchmark that we've been talking about. Even as we're taking deliberate and reasonable steps to open schools, I want to reiterate what we have been saying for the past year or more. When basic protocols are being followed, schools are safe places for children and adults. All the data from Massachusetts and around the country and indeed around the world show clearly that COVID transmission in schools is very low, even in communities where overall COVID rates are high. The bottom line is that in-person learning is not only essential for student success, both academically and developmentally, but it is also safe for students and educators. And the best way to ensure a more fully normal experience is to get everybody vaccinated. And hopefully today's action will help move us closer to that goal. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I see Member West has his hand up.
Thank you, Chair Craven. Before I say anything else, I want to acknowledge the thousands of citizens of the Commonwealth, most of them parents, who wrote to us to express their views on either side of the issue before us today. Regardless of how we vote, we won't please everyone, but that doesn't mean that we haven't heard everyone's voices or that we don't value their engagement in this process. Second, in thinking about the proposal, I want to reject the notion that the decision we're confronting is a simple matter of following the science. In my judgment, evidence on the efficacy of masking in school settings for preventing the spread of COVID is less clear-cut than is often suggested, nor does science tell us how to value whatever benefits it produces against the costs to students of not being able to see their teachers' faces for most of the school day. So I respect the views of any colleagues on the board who look at the same evidence that I do and reach different conclusions. Third, I want to express my frustration, frankly, that we're considering imposing mitigation measures on schools at a time when similar measures are not currently in place in seemingly similar settings populated by adults. In my view, schools should be the last places that we impose such measures on, not the first. But that's not something that we as a board on our own control. As I see it, the decision we face is whether exigent circumstances exist that adversely affect the ability of students to safely attend school. And if not, we don't have a legal basis to grant Commissioner Riley the authority he's seeking. Then we may also want to ask ourselves whether the steps the commissioner plans to take, which I appreciate him having shared with us in advance, will result in a better and more consistent experience for students as they start the third school year to be impacted by the pandemic. And based on the information that the commissioner has shared, based on the recommendation of the Department of Health and Human Services, I'm reluctantly convinced that such exigent circumstances exist. I'm also hopeful that the temporary measures the commissioner has proposed will, on balance, be beneficial to students, in particular by preventing the need to quarantine large numbers of students in the event of positive cases in schools. I'm also hopeful that they'll send a clear signal to educators, as Secretary Pizer suggested, about the importance of vaccination as our first line of defense. So I plan to vote in favor of the motion, but in doing so, I'd like to ask Commissioner Riley to engage in continued conversation with us as board members and with stakeholders around the Commonwealth about how best to exercise this authority. And that's particularly the case in two areas where I have some concerns. One is the lack of a clear end date or exit criteria for elementary school students who are not currently eligible for vaccination. I don't think the default can be continued masking rather than a return to unmasked conditions. And then the second is the proposal that in schools reaching 80% vaccination rates, unvaccinated students in these middle and high schools would continue to be required to wear masks. On both practical and ethical grounds, I'm not sure that this approach works. I'm not sure how we'll know who's vaccinated. I'm not sure that we really want students to be in a position of explaining why they're not vaccinated or of tattling on each other for inappropriately going unmasked. So if the data show that there's very low within school transmission once 80% of students and staff are vaccinated, then I think we should move immediately to at least experiment with letting all students remove masks, whether they're vaccinated or not. So I encourage continued conversation about those matters, but I appreciate the opportunity to consider this proposal and plan to support it.
Thank you, Member West. Member Hannaford.
Well, I like to begin by lauding my colleague, Member West, for using the word tattling in the middle of a high stakes vote on public policy. I thought that was just awesome. On a more serious note, let me just begin by saying I'm a no on this vote. And for me personally, masking is not worth dying on the hill for. So I want to start there. School reopening, I was willing to storm Normandy. but there's an order of magnitude difference between the two, and I just want to acknowledge that. Having said that, I do think this is a really critical issue and vote. And so I want to touch on the micro, the macro, and the meta. So micro, as Member West elegantly stated, tying this masking proposal to vaccination rates is just, frankly, really bad public policy. There's no clear off-ramp. It was recently reported that the vaccine for children under the age of 12 will not be approved in 2021. And even when it is, you have this very clunky, awkward, and really ethically precarious dynamic that the Member West again described vividly. And so I think that's a serious concern for me. A more reasonable off-ramp would have been tying it to community spread. I'm honestly genuinely surprised that this is being endorsed by our governor as an incentive for vaccination, because I consider our governor and his administration to be really smart about technocratic policy solutions. So I want to voice that with some candor. For the macro, like, I really appreciate the presentation and the data around case count, but I'm old enough to remember how this all started. When this all started, it was about flattening the curve. And the curve, you may recall, was about hospitalization rate and count. And all of a sudden, we're now focused on case count. And I do believe the goalposts have shifted, and there hasn't been an honest discussion about that. And I realize Delta is more transmittable, and it has us tied up in knots for reasons that I do think are real. But when you look at hospitalization and death rates, it remains remarkably low in our country, and particularly so in the Commonwealth. And so, like, I frankly think we have an opportunity, and you could argue a responsibility, to signal optimism that we are opening the door toward normalcy. Vaccination rates are incredibly high, one of the highest rates in the country. Hospitalization rates remain relatively low. You could say they're surging, as the media often does, but it's off a very low base. The 7-day running average for death count in the Commonwealth was 4 as of yesterday, which represents a 121% increase. And so I think there's a lot of focus on percentage increase and losing sight of the fact that in the grand scheme of things, hospitalization death rates are low. And as has been proven many times over, children are dramatically lower risk of being hospitalized. And that's a blessing in the midst of what has been a very difficult situation. And so for all of those reasons, I just think that erring on the side of caution loses sight of the bigger picture. And I'll just close with the meta. When this all started, and as our school reopening debate demonstrated, a debate about the pandemic and how we address it through policy solutions really became a debate about Trumpism itself and where you stand ideologically, rather than meeting in the messy middle to determine evidence-based policy solutions. I mean, look at how many holes Member West just poked in this proposal itself. And I think there's something to that. And blue states like ours went too far with restrictions, and we paid the price. And red states have gone too far in the other direction. And when I hear some of my friends say our family practices social distancing and masking, it almost sounds like a religion, to be honest with you all. And I think this proposal plays to the visceral tendencies of our body politic that should not ultimately drive public policy. And I really think we need to signal that better days are ahead, because they are. And that's the direction we're headed. And without a clear off-ramp, I just really worry about this proposal. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Member Hannaford. Member Hills.
Just a couple of comments. First, to reference the first thing Marty said, however people on the board vote, everyone should vote the way they want. Everyone should be equally respected for it. And I regret a few months ago when a couple of my colleagues on the board were attacked at the next meeting for the way they voted. I kind of regret not having reached out to them. So I just want to say that up front. However everyone votes should be fine with everyone on this call. I look at the situation and come to a different conclusion. This is a pretty straightforward vote for me. I'm certainly a yes on it. I think the context is really important. It shouldn't be remarkable Yet it seems to be remarkable that we live in a state where not only we have an education commissioner, but elected leadership. The governor, legislative leaders have dealt with this whole pandemic for a year and a half in a fairly non-ideological way, and have been completely unafraid to pivot, to change, to not be prisoners of whatever they might have said a few months earlier or a year earlier. So I kind of look at this whole situation and I say, the leaders that we have, both selected, like our commissioner, and elected, have done exactly what we should want them to do in leading us through this pandemic, which isn't over yet. It may not be as bad as it was a year ago or half a year ago, but it's a whole lot worse than if we had no pandemic, and it's a whole lot worse than it hopefully will be half a year or a year from now. So I look at the situation and I say, what brought them to this point? Well, first of all, we have a whole bunch of doctors and public health leaders who were absolutely sticking their neck out, both medically and politically, with the advice they were giving us in February and March that enabled us to force schools to reopen. So the backdrop to this, while not unanimity, is a group of public health officials that have largely called for us to take certain views with respect to masks. I look at the commissioner and I say, okay, this is not someone who seems to be accumulating power for the sake of using it. This is someone who's been very deft in the way he's used the authority that he has and that he's been granted. So to me, to have Jeff ask for the ability to mandate masks in schools for a month, set up exit ramps, maintain the flexibility to adjust those exit ramps as the situation changes, which is appropriate, comes down to one thing. Do I have confidence that he's going to make the best decision he can for the right reasons? And I can go back to, yeah, that's the way Jeff has dealt with, as commissioner, this whole situation. That's the way our elected leaders have dealt with this. And as a board member, Jeff is exactly the kind of person we want to entrust with this authority. I wouldn't lose a second of sleep that Jeff is going to kind of just keep restrictions in place for the sake of it. That's not where his head's at. But we have a public health situation that continues to evolve, and he should have the flexibility, just like the governor should have the flexibility to deal with it appropriately. So it's straightforward to me, not because it's perfect, but we don't have the luxury of only voting when the situation is perfect. I appreciate that you've done this. I appreciate you've pivoted pretty significantly to get to this point. And I sure hope we have a smooth opening to the school year across the state, and that 1 month from now, we're talking about success in relaxing the mandate. We'll see what the situation is.
Thank you, Member Hill. Any other members wish to speak on this topic before I call for a roll call vote? No, thank you very much, board members, for your comments and perspectives. And thank you, as Member West mentioned, to all the parents and concerned citizens who have written to us over the past 72 hours to talk about this. So Helene, without further discussion, I'll call for a vote. Would you mind doing a roll call for me?
I'm happy to, Chair Craven, and I will start with you, Chair Craven.
Yes.
Member Fernandez,
Yes.
Member Hills,
Yes.
Member Lombos,
Yes.
Member Moriarty,
Yes.
Vice Chair Morton. You're on mute.
Yes.
Very good, thank you. Secretary Pizer,
Yes.
Member Ruhannaford,
No.
Member Stewart,
Yes.
Member West.
Yes.
Thank you. The ayes have it. I'm going to call this meeting to adjournment. Do I hear a motion?
So moved.
So moved.
And a second.
Seconded. Second.
Thank you. Helene, do we need a roll call for that as well or no?
We should do a roll call to end the meeting as well. I will call the roll again. It's in alphabetical order. Chair Craven,
Yes.
Member Fernandez,
Yes.
Member Hills,
Yes.
Member Lombos,
Yes.
Member Moriarty,
Yes.
Vice Chair Morton,
Yes.
Secretary Pizer,
Yes.
Member Hannaford,
Yes.
Member Stewart,
Yes.
Member West.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.